Okay, welcome. Thank you for coming out today. My name is Alex Elmestad. I'm the Director of Learning Engagement here at CAM. Regarding is a program that's been designed to use the CAM's exhibitions as a catalyst for further cultural inquiry. Contemporary artists often draw or are informed by a variety of fields while making their work. This means there is a wide range of interdisciplinary access points in contemporary art and the museum. CAM partners with a wide range of experts to provide our audiences with this intellectual inquiry. Past topics for the Regarding series have included the post-internet, barbershops, robotics, debtors' prisons, the queer gaze, psychofiguration, the Gateway Arch, and this spring we will explore dirt track racing. Today, we have Out of Diaspora. The format today will involve more of a moderated discussion, but we will be absolutely sure to make to leave time for Q&A as well. So now I'd like to introduce our guest speakers. Artist Zlatko Ćosić. Zlatko is a video artist born in Banja Luka, Yugoslavia. His work spans a number of disciplines, including short films, video installations, theater projections, and live audio-visual performances. His work relates to the issues of identity, immigration, and the complexities of living in unfamiliar cultural environments. You can experience his video Murmuration every night as part of CAM's Street Views exhibition program, which is a 60-foot by 16-foot public art video projection onto the stainless steel facade of our museum. I like to refer to this as CAM's silver screen. So if you haven't seen it yet, make sure to drive by tonight. Chelsea Hand, Workforce Solutions Manager at the International Institute St. Louis. At this Welcoming Center for New Americans, she provides community integration services to more than 7,500 immigrants and refugees from 80 countries each year. Okay, I know we have a lot of ground to cover, so shall we launch right in? Chelsea, if you'd like to begin giving us some more context for what the International Institute is, your involvement, but also how audiences can learn more. However you want to do it, it's up to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. As Alex mentioned, my name's Chelsea Hand, and I am the Workforce Solutions Manager at the International Institute of St. Louis. I've been there for a little over nearly 3.5 years, and I truly enjoy speaking to groups in the community about our services that we offer to new Americans. As Alex mentioned, we do serve, over 7,500 new Americans each year. Not me personally, the organization serves that many folks. But I really enjoy working, like I said, with our services. So as we'll hear from Zlatko later, every refugee and new American's journey is different. But I'm here today to give you a brief understanding of what refugee resettlement looks like today in St. Louis, albeit very briefly. So we'll try to cover the basics during our time together, but I very much welcome questions afterward as well. So as Alex also mentioned, what is the International Institute? It is the Welcoming Center for New Americans in St. Louis. We have been around since 1919, so nearly 100 years. I'm going to pick this up a little easier, sorry. Our vision is a thriving community with an ethnically diverse and engaged citizenry, which thinks and acts globally. So therefore, our mission is to help immigrants and their families be productive Americans and champion ethnic diversity as a cultural and economic strength. So for nearly 100 years, we've provided essential community integration services with each new wave of immigrants to St. Louis. Next one. So all the services that the International Institute of St. Louis provides can be basically explained under our 3 pillars: immersion, investment, and inclusion. Our first pillar, immersion, covers the services we provide for a successful transition into life into America for our refugee and other new American clients. We have case management services for refugees during their first 6 months of arrival, English as a second language classes, cultural orientation, job search and placement, career path services, social work, counseling, computer and job training, among other services. So our immersion piece is really those core services we provide to help new Americans as they transition to life in America. Our second pillar, investment, covers most of our economic development department at the International Institute. So our microfinance department provides credit building services for new American entrepreneurs, small business development, as well as microloans for those that are interested. It's been found by a study through Jack Strauss at the St. Louis University a few years ago that foreign-born individuals are 60% more entrepreneurial than native-born Americans. So we seek to support that entrepreneurial spirit. And since 1999, 500 immigrant-owned businesses have started or expanded with $160 million positive economic impact for our region. So we're here to support that spirit and encourage that as well. Our last pillar of inclusion is geared towards the community, towards yourselves, to engage you with our new American clients through presentations, partnerships, and activities. We also offer education and advocacy for organizations and companies, business solutions services, and our interpretation and translation department, which help connect everyday St. Louisians with our new American clients. We believe communities are stronger when they embrace new culture and traditions. And some of you may be familiar or visited it a couple months ago, our Festival of Nations in Tower Grove Park. That's one of our largest events held each year in which we seek to engage the St. Louis public with the positive cultural and, with the wonderful contributions that new Americans bring to St. Louis, whether that's food, whether that's performance, whether that's some of the businesses that they've been able to start. So we host a variety of events to engage the community, some at the International Institute, some with partner organizations such as CAM. I brought a couple of flyers for our upcoming events if anyone's interested in engaging in other presentations or events that have to do with supporting new Americans in St. Louis. So I touched on a bit of our refugee resettlement services with our immersion piece, but what does that look like exactly through the International Institute and refugee resettlement? So the International Institute has been involved with resettling refugees since the era of modern refugee resettlement, which began around 1979, the late 70s. From 1979 to 2016, the last year we have recorded data, we've resettled 23,508 refugees in the St. Louis area. As you can see, we've kind of broken it down by demographic of where all these folks are coming from, and of course our largest category is other. This is because, as I've mentioned, as the waves of immigration and the waves of refugees has changed quite a bit through the years, and we're seeing, folks from different countries each decade or each year, basically. So, 34% is other. Our second largest group was Bosnia in the late 1990s, early 2000s. We helped to resettle 6,712 refugees here in St. Louis. Of course, that population has definitely grown and thrived here in St. Louis, as well as our Vietnamese population, 17% at 4,000. Somali population, which we're currently still resettling, we're resettled 1,688 individuals. Bhutan, which is a small country near Nepal, if you're unfamiliar, have been our 5% with a little over 1,000 individuals, and then Afghanistan and Iraq with nearly 1,000 individuals from those countries as well. Of course, other involves some of our other countries that we're seeing folks arrive from in the Middle East, Syria and Iraq as well as Democratic Republic of Congo and Ethiopia, as well as other countries. So this gives you kind of a brief overview of what refugee resettlement has looked like in St. Louis to this point, as well as what we're currently, who we're currently serving at this time. Right, so. Oftentimes, this is how we've explained to you how we're involved with refugee resettlement and supporting new Americans in St. Louis, but oftentimes I get asked, well, how can I get involved, or what can I do to be an advocate or to be a supporter for new Americans? Our first step would be check out our website, www.iistl.org. There we provide links to upcoming events, such as I mentioned on the flyers here, but can also highlight executive orders or other legislation that folks in the community may have questions on. We recently hosted a bagels and coffee seminar at our institute about close to a month ago that was a presentation with local community activists and leaders on the DACA program, the Dreamers Act, and it was there for the community to kind of provide that support and answer those questions that folks had about that, the new rulings dealing with DACA. So, you know, other ways to support New Americans would be to patronize New American businesses. If you've been on South Grand, if you've been to Bevo Mill, there's plenty of organizations and companies that you can support, and by visiting yourself or encouraging your friends and family to visit, to support those New Americans. And to support a welcoming community for St. Louis. We also have volunteer opportunities or other opportunities to join our Young Friends or Junior Board at the International Institute. And when we are resettling refugees, we rely heavily on donations for these new Americans as they begin life here in the United States. The funding is very limited for refugees through the government when they arrive, so we rely heavily on monetary and otherwise donations to help them you know, start their life here in St. Louis. So please check that out. And next, I'd just like to kind of show you a brief slideshow, brief photo slideshow over some of the services that we've talked about today, and to kind of give you a real life look of what it looks like for our services at the International Institute. So we'll start that. And it did have music, but we're going to just do it silently this time. So I can kind of narrate or answer questions along. But this is from our Thanksgiving feast that we host with our New Americans every year. But as Alex, our next one, our ESOL classes that I've mentioned as well. And this is sponsoring refugees is direct refugee resettlement, which means we are directly picking up folks from the airport and helping them to settle in their first homes, engaging them in community services, so health screenings, connecting to other immigration or social service agencies, connecting with the community. We do some field trips on Saturdays for families. This summer we had a really great summer camp that was held in our cafeteria with New American children. We offer job training programs to help those that haven't had work experience or to seek a new skill when working in America. My cup of tea here is our immigrant and refugee professionals, and coaching and mentoring them as they re-engage into life here in the United States, and our immigrant entrepreneurs who are starting businesses. We also offer Global Farms, which is teaching American farming methods to refugee entrepreneurs so that they can grow food to sell to local restaurants or markets, as well as feeding their families. So we have a couple of Global Farms, I believe 3. We offer citizenship courses and sometimes host the naturalization ceremonies at the International Institute. And of course, our Festival of Nations that I mentioned. This year we had a little over 150,000 visitors if you were able to attend. It was a great time. I'd like to highlight some of the different cultures that represent our New Americans in St. Louis. And we also engage with the community through presentations, more than 300 annually, so that we can do outreach to every St. Louisian. And then we, try to present facts to reduce hostility. This is our World Refugee Day event, and Anna Crosland, our president and CEO, is oftentimes called on to respond to local and international crises as a go. Same thing. So that again is our address is www.iistl.org. You can also email us at info@iistl.org if you have any questions about any of the services or programs that we offer. I also have my card here available if you'd like to speak with me directly about anything, or if you'd like to connect, I said again, to our upcoming events. I'd like to pass this around later if you'd be interested to join. So that's about it from me. That was a brief overview of our services at the International Institute, but I guess I'll turn it over to Zlatko.
And Zlatko, yes, thank you. Zlatko, I was just writing down on this paper, okay, where do we start with you? And
can you open that?
So what I think might be good as we kind of transition our PowerPoint here is maybe before we kind of launch into select works and things like that, maybe if you can give a little bit of an overview about how the International Institute has been involved in your life. I mean, it's a big question.
Well, thank you all for coming. I'm Zlatko Ćosić, and I moved to St. Louis 20 years ago, 1997. Is this microphone working? Okay.
It is, yeah.
So when I moved here in '97, my first experience was landing at the Lambert Airport late at night, and Bosnian caseworker picked me up from International Institute. And it felt good because he's from Bosnia, so we can speak same language, so I felt comfortable. So he takes me to the parking garage at the airport, takes a screwdriver, and starts his old Chevy. And that's how we start. He says, "Welcome to America." So it's funny now for me to take it. I love the little irony, and I just come from war experience, so I was like, okay, I'll handle this. And then, of course, I was a free case, somebody who doesn't have a family in America or sponsor, so my connection with International Institute was maybe month or two connection. They helped me, of course, with the apartment, food stamps, English classes, all these Saturday little trips to Cahokia Mounts or museums. And they helped me get my first job. So that's my experience with International Institute. I'm thankful. And it helped me a lot. But then after I realized, okay, it's on my own now. I have to get a job, a better job that's not only $6 per hour, and do something in my own profession. I was already in film and photography, so I wanted to do something I'm actually skilled for. Eventually, I did get there, but it was a struggle. First 3 years was a struggle with language, with understanding this culture. It's still a struggle, especially after the election. But as much as it was struggle, I also loved it because it was different to me. I mean, I love the country, I love the people. Some things I'm not getting it yet, but the first experience was go to Schnucks and use my food stamps, and the lady at the register is just laughing at me and so polite. It's like, is this cousin of mine or something? It was really a weird experience, so I had to adjust to this whole way people greet each other here. So, and then on the way home, I had to walk with all these bags. I got chased by some guys on Sydney Street. That was 20 years ago, chasing me with my whatever bags, food. But anyway, that was a little bit of struggle with my own culture that didn't really accept me because of my name is so Zlatko Ćosić doesn't tell you if I'm Serbian, Croatian, or Bosnian Muslim, so that was a little bit weird for my culture to understand who am I. Many people found out I came from Belgrade, which is capital city of Serbia, and I'm not Serbian, so that kind of triggers some weird response from my Bosnian community. So, but all that, what I'm just saying, triggered my artwork. Of course, I have to jump back into the war, and 19, 20 years old, graduate from high school, go to university, war starts, barricades appear on the streets, and my father gets kicked out from work because of his nationality and religion. And then I was next. They kicked me out from university because I couldn't take classes because of my nationality. And struggled, 3 years of discrimination, eventually captured, tortured because of my name. It was this ID that put me in the trouble because my name, Zlatko Ćosić, didn't tell police anything, but I don't have a middle name, and then middle name sometimes gets replaced by my father's name. And the father's name put me in trouble because his name tells you what's my religion and nationality. So I was tortured because of that. But eventually I got released. I refused to fight in the war. I refused to serve military. And I'm gonna do that for the rest of my life. So, and because of that, they came and arrested me and my father. They took us into forced labor, and after the forced labor, survived those 8 months there. Murmuration piece that's on the facade is inspired by the nature where I was working in a forced labor group. So I'll talk about that later. But eventually, after 8 months, they released me from the forced labor, and then I found out that they're gonna arrest again for the digging trenches in the front line, and I said no for that. I falsified my identity, became somebody else, and I escaped the war. I lived in Belgium for 3 years and moved here in '97. So that's a little bit of summary. That's all inspiring the work.
Well, and I want to make sure that we unpack a lot of that. But
We don't
if
have
you
time for that.
want to kind of like command me to get started here in terms of, you know, selected works, or just kind of talking about your practice as it relates to all the things that you just said.
Okay. While in Belgrade, I started in a film. I was in film school. My work was more abstract, nature-based, more motion painterly, like the piece A Murmuration. But then, not until I moved to St. Louis and I started doing these performances of this, adjusting to this culture, also dealing with my own community that was not accepting me. Because of that, I realized I'm constantly performing between these two cultures. So a lot of work it got developed based on that war experience and cultural experience. Only the Chimney States is the first one that I created, and it's actually collection of other refugees' stories and some of my experiences, and it's a broken, fragmented poetry, which is also visually represented in a fragment, and it's a balance between destroyed architecture, the ugly part of it, and the beauty of nature and beauty of my childhood growing up in Yugoslavia and Banja Luka, which is now in Bosnia country. So that work is something that I was scared of it. I had to relive the war to go deeper into this work. It gave me nightmares. It was 6 months of like not good feelings. But I had to do it. I opened this door like I almost died again. So, and when I was there, like it was scary, but then I'm comfortable to talk about it and make the work. So you can go to the next one. This is installation view of my piece on identity artifacts. The cabinet is filled with 20 years of collecting documents about myself. So labor, camp permits, IDs that changed from socialist, communist Yugoslavia to capitalist America, from a Latin alphabet to Cyrillic Serbian to back to English alphabet. So it's kind of like, I call it junk. It's a proof of my existence. And the irony is that I had to change my name, become Serbian soldier, written with Cyrillic writing to escape. It's still me, just different name, different accent that I had to practice. So the only ID that's not there is the fake one, which is destroyed. And so, yeah, we can move next slide. It's a close-up of these. And this work, Temporary Graffiti, Banja Luka, St. Louis, my hometown, and my second hometown, St. Louis, I connected through work that I started in Berlin. And I'm reflecting mirror light on architecture of Berlin. That's how I started, connecting the history of Berlin, which we all hopefully know, and Germany. And so I was thinking about history and architecture, if buildings could talk to us as a witness to events, historical events. So with that idea, I started working with my hometown. I went there and I taped same thing, same mirror, reflecting, capturing, and then St. Louis, and tried to make connection between immigrants who moved from Yugoslavia, Bosnia to America and St. Louis. It was a corner projection in the corner, which you could see in the previous slide. Next one. Color boarding, it's a work that very personal to me. It's kind of beautifying the torture day that I just mentioned. I was tortured for 6 hours, and I was tortured with water. So I had to create this for my own sake, to feel better about that day. It's beautiful to me, and the sound and everything is just ceremonial, beautiful, baptismal, kind of gave me new like hope.
Well, I just want to kind of jump on. Maybe we're getting to it later too, but you mentioned Murmuration too, which is up now.
I have a slide there too for
on
that
our
too.
facade, but you know, you kind of briefly touched upon this idea of using artwork almost as an escapism or as a way to deal with pretty traumatic events. I mean, is this fair?
It is. I mean, this is still 20 years after the war, so it's kind of maybe late to heal you making art. But yeah, it does feel that way. But when I'm making it, it's more for awareness to others, to give you a little reminder to my community what happened, but also to American society, what could happen if things go the way they are going right now. So it happens in one day, actually. Next morning, I woke up, things got ugly. And it's because of this nationalism, grouping, supremacy, and all these ugly elements. Keep going. This work without a number is actually my address in my hometown, and that's my house, means BB without number. So my street didn't even have a number. I found it ironic too, but that's the house where I was mostly hiding for 3 years and using as a bunker. It was constantly surveilled. I was constantly chased around, hiding in the attic, all kinds of hidden places around. But I never went in again after I escaped. So my wife, Zlatko Ćosić, kind of wanted to know more about the house. So we decided to go back in together. It felt good to be with somebody else, not alone. So I was assisting her in filming this project. It was projected on 2 sides of the walls as I took part of a wall from my house. And yeah, the windows are important in the house because I was constantly looking for play, who is coming, who is parking. So next.
Well, I just want to mention too, so you've also kind of briefed upon this as well, this idea of lost identity, not only in terms of Yugoslavia, but you've talked about this idea of being a performer, right? So not only lost identity, but also this idea of having no national identity, or it's sometimes that it becomes so faded, and sometimes you want to lose that identity because you're trying to avoid, you know, being captured or tortured and things like that. But sometimes you're also trying to grasp back for it.
Well, in the war, I gave up on any kind of relationship to Bosnian, Serbian, or Croatian. So that immediately disappeared because that meant hate. It's dividing, it's grouping, which I'm against. So that was the first struggle. Second thing is moving to America and becoming American, which is, I would say, my third identity. My first one would be being an artist, so I can globally exist. And the second one, which I cannot get rid of it, is South Slavic, Yugoslavian. And when I say that, many people, Bosnians, Croatians, Serbians, get upset because I'm bringing the memory of a country where we lived together in peace. And that bothers them because they all wanted their own independent countries. And that meaning independent is nationalistic, and it caused many dead, many, you know, displaced people. So by bringing this new identity, reinventing South Slavic Yugoslavian, I feel better that way to belong to a country that doesn't exist. American identity, of course, is disappearing slowly after the election, if I could mention that again, because I'm disappointed that this society can even exist under these conditions. So I'm feeling less American. I'm feeling more artist, still South Slavic. That helps.
Chelsea, since you're with the International Institute, not necessarily to get political, but as it relates to kind of what's happening and unfolding current day, I think that's a good segue. Mm-hmm. Maybe having to do with like what policies are unfolding currently and how the International Institute is kind of navigating that.
Sure. So, you know, things are changing every day. And that's kind of what we've been dealing with at the International Institute as well, is we're, you know, continuing to provide the services that we can under the conditions that we can. You know, we're often waiting from the federal government for a lot of our dictates, mandates on numbers that are coming in and groups and things like that. But we, you know, things change frequently, so we have to kind of adapt to that and be ready to roll with that. You know, since it's been a bit of a tumultuous time in our political climate, as Zlatko's mentioned, the best thing that's come out of it is the heaps and heaps and heaps of community support. St. Louis has reached out with open arms to the International Institute, and since November we've seen, you know, just so much support for our services and for the New Americans. So although it's been a rough time for our country, and especially for, you know, refugee resettlement in general, we've really tried to take in stride, you know, the support and the welcomingness that our community has offered to us and to our New American clients. We are committed to our clients and committed to the services that we provide, and we will continue to do the best with whatever comes ahead. But, people often ask us, well, what's happening with this? What's happening with that? And we're like, we're also waiting to hear. We're also waiting to know what the next steps are. But like I said, it's been a really rough time, but a really great time to just know that the support is there for the community. So.
Okay, Zlatko, continue, please.
Let's skip this one. Let's go to the next one. Talking about performing, that's one. Rebirth. I found myself in these last 20 years constantly splitting. And any new experience I get, it adds another to my identity. And this piece is actually reflecting. It's like a new chance, new bird, being in a cocoon. So it's a splitting of these experiences. It's never feeling like my original identity that I was born with. So it's just constantly adding to it. So that talks about it. Can we go next one? Or
Can everyone hear? Do I need to kind of like turn things up a little bit? All right. I'm going to mute this one, and then Zlatko, if you can maybe, take it
do
out.
some singing.
There we go.
Okay.
Is that better?
Is it better?
Does that
Okay.
sound better? Okay, good.
Let's go next one. That's just installation view of several of these. Let's go next. Another. The Voice of a Pioneer is something I did at the end of my graduate school. And it's hard to see, but the TVs are positioned. I'm in the middle, and the other two TVs are angled 75 degrees, so I'm actually talking to those side TVs. I'm dressed in a uniform again, the uniform I hated when I was a kid, and the one that I was against it throughout the war. That's a pioneer, or a Boy Scout in a way. That's what President Tito made us wear when we were 7 years old. That's part of socialism and communism. And I put it on again. And I communicate to my father. He goes back to looking for his house that he lost in the war. He couldn't find it. And on the other one, he's 72 years old, building another house in Croatia. So it was a nice fragmented conversation with my father, which I usually don't show my work as stills. So I'm going to keep this in this direction. I don't do it as a still, so I would love if you go to my website and see this in motion. So, yeah, next. South Slavic Requiem. So one day, walking in Croatia, Bosnia border, Dinara Mountain with my wife, I saw this beautiful church, I saw this shot, and I started filming it. While I was filming it, I heard this shepherd playing flute, and that flute brought tears to my eyes immediately because the sound reminded me of my childhood. So the goal of this project was to find a flute player. It took me many days to actually find him where he lives, and eventually I found him. He was really negative towards me, thinking that I want to steal his house, and there's a deeper conversation there, but he asked me where I'm from. I said, from Banja Luka. Oh, you're one of us. I said, I'm not one of yours. Where do your parents live? I said, they live in Croatia. Oh, you're one of them. I said, I'm not one of those either. So who are you? And I said, I'm nothing. I don't belong to any of those groups. And he said, come in, brother. So I recorded him. I had to listen 3 hours of his stories, but I recorded all kinds of flutes, and that's the sound check of this work. And it's actually the work that I call at the end of my exploration of those years. So installation view. Murmuration right there on the facade, from when it gets dark till midnight every day till New Year's Eve. Murmuration is the pattern of birds, flock of birds. It came from nature. My work usually sits between real and abstract. This is, of course, abstract, was manipulated. It's meditation to me. It's just beautiful, but it carries this memory of me being in the forest in the labor. So also, I'm seeing it as a satellite view of a camera with a body heat sensor that can see all the movement of refugees throughout the Europe that's current. 3 minutes. That's close. Okay, so the work from here progressed from the South Slavic Requiem. Of course, I have worked from Berlin Wall that deals with surveillance, spying. Go next. Stasi prison, and inspired by a person who gave me a tour through Stasi prison, who was imprisoned in one of these cells. So he told me the story about the movement of bricks when he was sitting in these illusions. And this piece itself, if you watch online, moves. And it's hard for your brain to keep up the movement. But if you move your head, come back, you'll see it moved. So there's illusions. And of course, it's all about injustice and people who should not be in prison, like a Stasi prison. Next, work about democracy in our country, limited democracy. Work about involvement, intrusion of media and countries in another wars, in this case, Vietnam. This is a very short experimental approach to protest. If you could imagine a DJ spinning a video with sound, that's what you're going to see, and people are chanting one same line. Check it out on the website. Okay, next. Women's March after the election. Yeah, we can go next. Some work where I compiled a lot of raw footage of the protest and all socio-political content and performed live using TVs and projections for an hour and a half, all live protest. Something I like to do, improvised, and it gives me a really good feeling. Next. Work, even the bird snored, I did with my wife Rachel, and it's self-explanatory piece. And these birds actually have a soundtrack, which is the Women's March soundtrack. So if you could imagine birds looking down at the crowd. And this is the work I did next day after election results, and it made me really sick. So I had to do something, reflect. It reminded me of the first day of the war in Yugoslavia and Bosnia, and it was pretty devastating for me. And I went to school, WashU, where I teach, and I had to advise students. They were all crying, and they were really concerned. Nobody talked about art. That reminded me again about my experience, made me sick for the entire day, and it still makes me sick to even believe this is happening with our country, with racism, injustice, xenophobia, and all other negative energies are taking over. And I think that's the last slide, yeah.
I just wanted to kind of shift gears. Thank you, Zlatko. I wanted to shift gears to question Chelsea here just for a second again, and maybe ask what maybe the or some of the biggest challenges that refugees and immigrants might have when they come to St. Louis today. I'm actually going to give you this one so we can minimize it.
Well, you know, Zlatko may be able to answer this more succinctly, but, you know, each group, each individual is different. So everybody has different challenges, but the main challenges that we see are, you know, the resettlement period that the government and that we are able to support the refugees for is so very limited that folks are often needing to start a job, you know, have their kids in school, be fully integrated within mere 3 to 4 months after arrival. So that's a lot of pressure when you've, you know, been uprooted and resettled into a new country. You're trying to figure out how to go about your day-to-day activities and routines. And language is, you know, compounds the difficulties with that sometimes when folks haven't had the opportunity to study English or to you know, practice English in a day-to-day setting. So, you know, just getting into those basic everyday, what we call everyday, going to job, going to school, going to work, you know, those are major hurdles that folks have to kind of, you know, deal with among their own emotional and traumatic stresses that they may have or that may be bringing with them. So, you know, we are there to support. We're also there to help folks get as self-sufficient as quickly as possible so that they can support themselves and their families. But, you know, language, lack of transportation, cultural, you know, understanding the culture and understanding, you know, even grocery stores is really some of the things that folks have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. you know, if you've had limited access to different types of food through your life, and you're dropped in the middle of Schnucks or Dierbergs, and there's 75 different cereals to choose from, I mean, that's overwhelming in and of itself. So, you know, I'm not a new American, I'm not a refugee, I can't speak from that perspective specifically, but what we see and what we try to help folks with is basically these integral services and ways to feel comfortable in their new home.
And this actually will go back to Zlatko here, and then we're going to open it up for questions. As it relates to this idea of the everyday, you know, I think this is really fascinating. You touched upon a lot of this. You had mentioned briefly kind of working in video and kind of like how you have been trained in things like that, not only from Yugoslavia, but also into St. Louis. Could you kind of just speak to that a little bit in terms of this transition to everyday, from everyday, you know, Yugoslavia and your training as a video artist to kind of where you are today?
So training comes, of course, from Belgrade when I went to film school, but then they also changed in by taking classes at Forest Park Community College, getting my degree at Webster University and Washington University. That's where I got trained. The narrative comes from life experiences, so that's a training. Transition was, like I said, first 3 years was rough. And that transition, I mean, but it's also intriguing because it's new to me. I love new stories. I love challenges. I love a little struggle. I mean, that's how I lived through the war, and I was good in survival mode. So here, of course, I started loving, after 3 years, Missouri and St. Louis and the nature and hiking, biking, my coffee shops, clients I had while I had my own company, and friends, family. So transition was going through that. But I would say art is one of my tools for transitioning, talking about it, connecting cultures, speaking to others. So that's how I do it. And it's a tool I picked. I mean, I'm trained to be a computer scientist, electrical engineer. That's my high school, that's my university. I left that because of overwhelming experience and story to tell. So of course I would make more money as a computer scientist, but I picked to be a professor and to make art.
That's the answer I was fishing for. It was just like art is your everyday, right? So
it is. I'm a full-time artist now, I could say. The amount I produce and how I process every day.
But you were always a full-time artist as it relates to thinking about this idea of memory, but also practicing every day with video and video production, and then, in a sense, presenting or representing those memories to new audiences through exhibitions or museum, etc.
Yes, I also had this secret goal to communicate better to people from former Yugoslavia. Like, who is here from former Yugoslavia? Anybody from Bosnia, Croatia, and Serbia? 70,000 living here. Nobody. So I failed in reaching that audience. That was my one. Thank you. So to me, it's like that's my biggest failure in art, that I did not reach that community that I'm part of it, that international institute helped. And I know why. It reminds them of the struggle. They don't want to face it. They don't want to even share their culture to their kids. They don't want to talk about it. It's just a reminder. I get it. It's a reminder for me too, but I hope they could reconcile, forgive each other, and move forward. As naive as I was, I did not reach that community. It's the biggest disappointment.
Well, there's still time. Okay, there's still time.
There is time.
So Candace in the back has a microphone. And if you raise your hand, she's going to come to you and give you that microphone for some questions and answers. We have one down here in the front. Okay, project, please.
For Chelsea, how many immigrants are allowed into the United States annually? What percentage of them you consider refugees?
So I don't know. I will tell you that the number of immigrants, because there's so many different legal channels for immigration in the United States. There's visa holders, there's refugees, there's asylees. I can speak to the refugee number. The refugee number is set by the federal government. The president each year has set a cap. So, you know, in the past we've had 50,000, 75,000. In 2016, President Obama extended the cap to 110,000, which meant that we saw a little over 1,100 refugees here in St. Louis for fiscal year 2017. It was a very busy year for us. The proposed, as you may have seen in the news recently, the new cap is set to be at 45,000, which is quite a bit smaller than previous years, which means that the proportion, of course, that comes to St. Louis will be much smaller as well. So that's generally how it is. I can't tell you that. I just want to be honest. I'm unsure of the number of refugees versus all immigrants, but I can get that information to you if you'd like.
Yes, please. Candace.
Thank you so much for sharing as a group, and thank you, Zlatko, for sharing your story. Have you ever considered, Zlatko, for incorporating your work into dance? I've seen dance pieces that have used video and use social justice as a means of communicating a message, and they've used backdrop of video. And I think I've just heard of you now, but maybe you've done that before.
Well, dance is my favorite part of experimental visual expression, and I work with dancers a lot. I teach class at Webster University, Media for Performance, where I work with dancers to produce time-based media for choreography, projection, sound, all kinds of work that relates to movement. And I did collaborate with many artists, dancers, Tom Brady right here with Satori. We did several projects together that incorporates dance, projection, mapping. Recently I did project in University of Wisconsin, worked with dancers. Then at Webster with Becca Reed, I did project called Liminal Rituals of Refugees, where I was a guest artist at school, working with dancers and sharing this idea of becoming a refugee and separating in 3 stages and doing that through dance and projections. But there's a work. On my website, there's a piece called Shifted that's all dance. And one of the dancers is here, Audrey Symes. So check that out to see that experimental approach. Hope that answers the question.
Any others? We covered a lot of ground. I know. It's complex stuff. There's one here in the front.
I was really struck by the comments that it happens in one day. That one day the barricades went up and there was a war. And I just wanted to ask you, the general feeling of Yugoslavia as a whole, back when it considered itself a whole, was it negative towards the government as it seemed to me, or can you speak about the way it disintegrated from a unity to a nationalistic fracture? Was the way that people thought about the government a part of that?
Well, I can tell you based on memories, my memories, and also my parents' conversation. I still talk about it with them. And they loved their life in Yugoslavia. They had everything they needed. And my father was not communist. He practiced his religion. So he was not prosecuted because of that, because sometimes that happens in communism. Tito, president, was there since Second World War, died in 1980s. After 1980s, there was these nationalist freaks that came out and start becoming party leaders, and they start separating Bosnia, Serbia, Croatia, Slovenia, Macedonia, Montenegro. So that's when that's 1989. Berlin Wall goes down. The things start changing in Europe. People got unhappy, all this nationalism. They brought old symbols of the Second World War. Religion got mixed in, and the conflict started. But all my interviews with people from that country, including my generation and my parents' generation, they loved it, they miss it. I mean, sometimes they say we had bananas. You know, that was like a symbol of having money. But after Tito died, no bananas. You know, if I could use that little symbolic poetry there. But so I miss it. My father is the only one that had a job. My mother was at home. I didn't have to do anything, or my brother, but we lived great. So in 1990s, you lose electricity for 3 years. The food is just like it's a gift, you know. We had to plant some, potatoes and cabbage and ate that nonstop. But so that wasn't a good life. I mean, all this hate that developed because of the name and religion and accent, same color people, but they just hated each other so much. So I don't think that's a good life. Now, after the war, they have their beautiful countries, nationalist-driven countries, in my opinion, and it's still, they suffer economically. I think their identity is also screwed up, in my opinion, so I don't think that's better life than Yugoslavia. Of course, socialism and communism had its own issues, but Tito was separating from communism in Russia and becoming independent coalition with 4 other countries. And I love that socialism, actually, at least the one there that I lived through. I don't have any bad memory except the pioneer outfit. A little bit weird. But people like to put uniforms, and that shows the power of a country. And these symbols like a flag, an anthem, uniform, that's dangerous, actually, in my opinion. It brings some bad emotions. Hope that answered.
What do you plan to do in the future in terms of the direction of your work?
I'm gonna go back to computer scientist and make money. The new work is developing as we speak. I'm part of the protest that's happening in this beautiful city of ours, and I'm documenting the energy so far. And I'm again between police and community, and I'm thinking about 2 projects that exist together as a middle line, and that's what I'm doing these days. And I'm loving what I'm seeing because it reminds me of energy I had when I was 21 fighting in my country. I was also in Belgrade, part of probably one of the craziest protests that lasted 6 months, every day, 24 hours. Against Slobodan Milosevic. Never stopped. I never seen that before or heard about it. So I was part of that too. So I'll continue capturing the energy, exposing what's happening. So documentarian with the art practice there. Hope that helps.
Bravo to Zlatko.
Thanks,
It's great to have this good energy here. I see both of you work as forms of resistance, and I'm kind of a little bit curious about how you plan to, you answered a little bit that question about the future and if things get worse and worse, what happens? That's one of the questions. The other question is how many people, how the percentages of people coming to St. Louis, how is that decided? Is there, I have no idea how that's done. So that's part of my question. But I also want to make sure that people know that there is another great artist coming to St. Louis, not in person, but through a film that opens next Friday, next Friday. At the Tivoli, and it's called Human Flow. It's by Ai Weiwei, and I really highly recommend people go see it because it will show, it's a little bit long, 130, 40 minutes, but it covers the whole world pretty much, and I think it's like everything he does, quite monumental, and so I really say go to the Tivoli starting next Friday. Human Flow. You want to answer the question?
Yeah.
Sure, I can tackle the refugee question. So the United States government works with the UNHCR, the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, to do third-party refugee resettlement, which is what part of the what the International Institute is a part of and the U.S. government is a part of. So refugees are folks that are forced to flee their homeland due to war, persecution, or fear of persecution, and are then seeking asylum in a secondary country, generally next to the country they're fleeing from. There they can be registered with the United Nations High Commission for Refugees in a refugee camp. And the first goal is to get folks back home. If that's unavailable, it's keeping folks in that second country. The third option is third country resettlement. I believe there are 11 countries in the United States that do the third party resettlement, including the United States and Canada and Australia. The U.S. government, the U.S. State Department, and the federal government works with the UNHCR to decide which groups they're going to allow in each year. So that is set through the U.S. government, but working with the United Nations High Commission for Refugees to see which groups they're going to allow in. So when they set the cap or the number of refugees they're going to allow in, they also set how many from each geographic area that they're going to allow in, and so that's all determined each year. So that's why it changes. That chart that I had has drastically changed throughout the years as we've seen folks from different areas of the world fleeing their homelands and then being resettled in the United States. Does that answer your question?
So you're subjected to whatever they decide?
Right. We have no say. No, we are I would say like a subcontractor of the U.S. government. The International Institute is part of a larger organization that works with the U.S. State Department, and so we are resettling groups that have been determined at that level, and come to St. Louis for a variety of reasons, as free cases, as Zlatko mentioned, or as family reunifications, for a variety of reasons. But we don't get to determine or which groups are let in. So.
Well, my work in the future, so it's clear at this point that my work exists in this time. So I abandoned that past as a content for my work. So it's driven by what's going on in St. Louis, what's going on in this country. So that's where I see my future work moving into socio-political work and activism. Of course, there's a work like Murmuration that will still be produced. There's still beauty that I enjoy, in my experimental video art. And one thing that's bad, that could be bad, is if Americans let themselves fall into the fear. The fear was something that I can advise you about. It really shuts you down. And media, American media is doing that so well. It's this fear and fake news and all around, and it doesn't help to have that kind of president that doesn't know how to do his job. In theory, if that's a job, he would be fired. But American society is not doing anything about firing him or impeaching him. So that's a little bit troublesome. It sounds to me from my previous experience that that's a dictatorship, maybe it's energized by nationalism and white supremacy and all these other negative energies that are running through this country. So there is a little bit of that concern, but if we stay together strong, we can fight this. So through artwork, through all kinds of socially engaged work, or start teaching your kids about it. I mean, that's something to teach them what's evil, what's good. I use art as my tool to share my opinions. Maybe somebody will grab it.
So I know we have one last question here. Sarah, please.
Okay, my first question is, how long did it take you to start making art after you got to the United States? Because you said it was 3 years were very difficult, and then it took you a while to process what was going on. And then did the September 11th, was there an impact of September 11th that's similar to what you're feeling now? Did that get incorporated? Did you have, I mean, because that's in some ways this whole birth of nationalism and militarism, if you see that arc?
Well, I still have a hard time talking about 9/11. It's just a sick event, and it's so sick to me that people can hate each other that I couldn't even make art about it. So there's no relation to me. I cannot even process it. I cannot process that huge hate like that. Of course, it reminds me of the war, and my work talks about different kind of tragedies. But I did start making art as soon as I arrived to Belgrade. I escaped December 1894. Like in 95, January, I found this film center. I was already making work. I was never trained to do that, but all these stories had to come out. Moving to St. Louis, I think the trigger of this cultural shock and issues with my own community, South Slavic community, if I could call in one name like that, triggered a lot of other work. But it took me some time till whenever Only the Chimney States was made, let's say 2010, so it took me good 10 years to jump into that. I think I kind of grew up enough and processed my experience so I could talk about it.
Okay, if we can please do a round of applause for our speakers, Zlatko and
Thanks.
Sarah.